Welcome back to Tomatoes, Poppies, and Everything Gardening. I'm Heather, and I'm coming to you from Central Virginia, Zone 7B-ish. So today what I am going to do is clear up some of my tomato processing mess from a couple years ago. So, well, I'll just show you. Now this jar is tomatoes that I processed last, say, August. So they're only a year old. What I'm going to do in this video after I turn the camera around, I'm going to pulsate these like in a blender, or I could use my little magic bullet. That would be good. And I'm going to make a really, really fine powder. And we are going to turn that into whatever we want it to be. We are going to whirl these dehydrated cherry tomatoes into a nice fine powder. I'm going to put them in a clean jar, this jar right here. And then I'm just going to keep that in my freezer. When I want to make tomato paste, I will take out maybe, let's say, a tablespoon, mix it with a tablespoon of water, or until I get that consistency of that real thick tomato paste. So I don't know if you guys see the recipes every now and then. It'll call for 1 tablespoon of tomato paste or 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. And then you open that little can of tomato paste and you've only used a small amount, and you can freeze it. I used to do that. It just takes up space and then you forget about it. But I like this better because you can just take out what you need, make what you need, and you're done. So maybe if I just needed 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, maybe half a tablespoon and half a tablespoon of water. But you just have to play around, you know, and get that consistency that you need. You can also make like tomato sauce, but you would use more water, less of this future that we're going to make here in a minute, ground up dehydrated tomatoes. So when these are dehydrated perfectly well, they sound like that. They don't stick inside the jar. They flow really freely. So I feel safe to grind these up and use these. Remember, I am going to keep it in the freezer just to be safe. These are 2 years old. So these are some that I made 2 years ago. And they look fine to me. I probably could still go ahead and use them. But because most online sources say maybe a year max, 6 to 9 months, I'm pushing it at a year, 6 to 9 months for your dehydrated tomatoes. So I'm going to say a year for me, for my safety. Do what you feel is best for your own family. Do your own research. You know, I do things a little bit weird sometimes, so don't go by what I do. But these looked a little sticky. So see how they're kind of sticking? I definitely wouldn't feel safe using these after 2 years. They seem a little gummy maybe. So these I'll just throw out. Maybe the seeds will sprout. I've had that happen before with dehydrated seeds. And then these 2 guys I'll probably do the same. I don't even remember the varieties of the tomatoes. I will say I prefer to dehydrate a red tomato versus like this is probably, maybe that's like Tropical Sunset. It's a real pale kind of tomato. I don't know what it is, but we're going to get rid of all 3 of those. We're going to grind this into powder. And also what we're going to do today is we're going to take these Geranium Kiss tomatoes. They're really good big size. So last year I did Chadwick cherry tomato, and if you've ever grown that, it's a beautiful cherry tomato. I recommend it. There's really nothing I can think wrong with that tomato. I will probably grow it again. It's probably about 25% smaller than this, but it was a really good chunky cherry tomato. We'll just say like that size. And so when I would slice it in half, I would put the cut side up on my dehydrating racks like this. I'll just do it. So I would slice it, put them upside down like that. I don't know if you can see it. My camera is probably not at the right angle. And you want them with the cut side up so that the juice, as it's dehydrating, can concentrate into your fruit instead of like this where it's all going to drip out. I just have a basic cheap dehydrator that I bought probably 3+ years ago. It still works. It still runs. So I'm just going to keep using it. Maybe someday I'll upgrade to a nicer, fancier dehydrator. Maybe someday I'll get a freeze dryer. I don't have the space or the funds for that right now. So for now, we're making this $30 dehydrator work, and it's been doing a great job for the last 3 years. I'm gonna slice them, put them into the machine. I just ran some peppers through. I think they're about done. And I will end up with more of these. So you really have to learn the feel of it, and that takes practice. So year one, when I did this process, it took 3 tries before I got it right. I would, clean my tomatoes, cut them, dehydrate them, and then I would think, oh, well, they're done enough. They're done enough. They might still be a little tacky, but they're done enough to touch. They weren't. And within a week or two, those tomatoes were actually molding inside of my jars. So now I make sure when I dehydrate peppers or tomatoes that they are really firmly dry and they're not tacky at all. If they have any give to them or gumminess, I just keep running them through the machine until it is completely dehydrated. I mean, it's just going to get more concentrated and more dry the more you dehydrate it. So for me, I would rather have less fluid still left and take a chance on ruining a whole product. And that's what happened twice. I had to throw out full jars, like maybe not this big of a jar, but close, because 1 or 2 in there started to mold. I just had to throw out the whole lot. So you really want to take your time, make sure they're fully dehydrated. That's the most important tip I would recommend. And you may have to just experiment and learn what that feels like for the peppers, learn what that feels like for the tomatoes. And yeah, but if they're like this, you're good to go. So for the first week or 2, I do not put these into long-term storage. Once they're dehydrated, I might give it even more like a day before I put them into any kind of container. So I would keep them on the trays inside of the machine with the lid on. No heat. Just let them kind of chill, sit there, cool off. And then I might put them into a jar like this. That's going to be their permanent home. But I may just leave the jar lid slightly ajar. Just slightly, so no fruit flies get in there or anything. You could put like some kind of mesh over, but you don't want to directly seal it up for the first week. So, and then, I might put the lid on once a day and give them a shake if I remember. But by the 2-week mark, you should know for sure if they're going to be ready for long-term storage. And then you can just put on your lid. And then every now and then you might give them a shake. Honestly, I probably haven't looked at these for a year. But they're still good. And I'm going to make that powder with them. And I'm sure it'll be very concentrated. Very, very delicious. So if you don't have a dehydrator, maybe you could work with your oven settings. Get it to the very lowest setting that you can get it. Most ovens will not go down to like that 120 range, 125 range that you might need to do this process. So you could somehow rig it so that your door is ajar slightly to bring some of that heat out. And then maybe if you could use one of your oven thermometers or something to kind of check that temperature, or just watch the tomatoes. When I was a kid, long ago in the old days, people would put their tomatoes like out on their roofs, the rooftop, to kind of dehydrate them in the sun, like a sun-dried tomato. So you can kind of Google that if you want to do it. I have so many bugs around here that I don't do that. Maybe I'll try that someday, but for now I just use my little $30 dehydrator, and it seems to work out really well. And it's a great way to use up these cherry tomatoes. So at a point in time in the summer, we get super duper sick of cherry tomatoes. Like, we don't want to eat them anymore. So this is what I do. I make bruschetta, or I make dehydrated tomatoes for future processing. I've also fermented cherry tomatoes before, and then I forget about them in the back of the fridge. And this is actually a 2-year-old jar that I would occasionally look at and think, well, I don't feel like it today. I don't feel like eating that today. And so now it's been 2 years now, so I don't know if they're still good. I don't feel safe to eat one today, but I think what I will do is just open it and smell it and tell you if I think it smells still well fermented, or if something weird has gone on. And this is an actual fermenting jar. You can see it's got a valve to let some of the pressure and the air out, and liquid, if liquid needs to drip out. So I think what I'm going to do is clean this up after I throw these out and ferment some peppers in here. Okay. It doesn't really smell like much of nothing. It smells like spaghetti sauce a little bit. I probably could just eat these. I'm sure they're still fine. I mean, it looks perfectly fine to me. But I guess to be super duper safe, I better not. I will cut a few of these up I'll show you what they look like on the tray, and then I'll load them into the machine, turn it on, and well, you can watch me grind these up if you want to. How about we do that? I'll get a tray of these going. We'll grind these up. I'll make a little bit of paste just to kind of taste it. And yeah, that sounds like a plan. Here is a better close-up view. You know, the light is kind of glaring on the glass, but you can see it just kind of shriveled down to nothing, pretty much. There are still seeds in there. I don't de-seed them. I just cut them in half. Do give them a little quick rinse just to make sure they're clean. Maybe a little quick run through some vinegar water soak, and then rinse, and then air dry. And then you cut your tomato in half, put it onto the rack, and get them nice and dehydrated. Very concentrated flavor. All right, guys, so I had an issue with that magic bullet. I think it's actually broken. So I did go ahead and took out the peppers from the dehydrator, added some of those geranium kiss that I sliced in half, and just put them on the dehydrator at the temperature range of about 115 to 125. You can see they're nice and pretty and dehydrated. You can see the seeds in there. So they kind of shrink down to nothing. So it's good to have a nice amount of cherry tomatoes going at one time. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pick these off because they're kind of stuck. Kind of got stuck on there. Now some people use parchment paper in their dehydrators, but I don't like to waste that much. So I just kind of clean my trays between use. There you go. You can see they're nice and dry. I'm going to put them in this jar for now. We'll do the same process that we talked about earlier, where I just kind of keep an eye on them for the next 1 to 2 weeks. Make sure they're not sticking at all. We do not want them to mold. So now we're going to use my blender for the dehydrated tomatoes from last summer. And I'm going to load this back up again. I have some more tomatoes to put on here. Yeah, so we're going to have to use the blender. I'm not sure what's going on with that magic bullet, but I think it's something down by the base where the blade is, because it's putting off like a black powder. So I'm actually going to have to throw away what was inside of the container that we just worked on, that you saw in that video. That was actually several days ago, because I had time to do all this, to dehydrate these guys. So, yep, things like that, little things can stumble you and get you off track. So I just have to go climb in my cabinet, dig out my blender, which I normally don't like to use, and get busy. That didn't fill up much, but I've got another round I'm going to get going. And then what I'm thinking about doing is trying an experiment. Now that these are dehydrated, could I turn them into some kind of sun-dried tomato that's packed in like olive oil and put in my fridge? I'm going to do some research on that. I'm not sure, but I think it would work. And I think it would be a really good thing to have on hand, because my one daughter hates tomatoes, but she likes sun-dried tomatoes that she can put on sandwiches that are kind of marinated. So I'm going to look into that, and we're going to get that blender. To say things are not going well is kind of an understatement, I suppose, but this does seem to work better with my coffee grinder slash spice slash pepper grinder. I'm still not getting the texture I was initially hoping for. I'm going to mix a little bit of this in some water and see what it looks like. What I may end up doing is saving what I have left in the jar to grind for, like, let's say soups, stews, something I could just sprinkle some of this tomato bits into to kind of make it thickened a little, maybe give it some tomato flavor. Don't think I'm going to be using this to make tomato paste or tomato sauce. However, what if we do an experiment and we take some of these dehydrated tomatoes that were recently dehydrated within the last 5-7 days, and put a few of those into this grinder and see what kind of texture we get. Still not a super fine powder. So my conclusion with all of this is that if I want a super duper fine powder, I'm going to have to take all the steps to process the tomatoes and make it into a smooth consistency that then I could dehydrate it and then pulse it into a powder. But that just seems like way, way, way too much work for me. I like things super duper easy. So probably not going to do that, at least not currently. Maybe some year down the road, I might want to try that. But for now, I'm just going to dehydrate excess tomatoes and we will just drop them into soups or stews or make those sun-dried tomatoes in oil if I can find a way to do that quick and effectively and easy as possible. But I'm going to go ahead and mix both of these powders for you guys, and we will see the consistency when just some basic water, tap water, is added. The one on the right are the tomatoes we just dehydrated recently. The one on the left is the one that I have held on to for a year. Remember, it's a different variety of tomatoes. Not sure why the ones on the left got such a rich, dark color. Maybe I dehydrated them a little too long. I mean, they smell fine, taste fine. Maybe I burnt them a little. I don't know, because it is kind of a dark color. I'll let this sit for a few minutes and check. You know, neither one of these is the consistency I would need for a paste, tomato paste, or a tomato sauce. They're still very chunky despite the grinding. Now this one I would consider eating fresh, like, you know, just taking a spoon of it and eating it after it is reconstituted. But this, the one that's over a year old at this point, it's not looking too appetizing. Maybe a year is a little too long to hold on to those dehydrated tomatoes. So probably I may just compost that jar of dehydrated tomatoes. I'm sure the birds would love to pick through for the seeds, and or other critters out there. The tomatoes on the right, definitely, you know, they're still viable. They're still good. I will be saving more of these as I get more out from the garden. I learned a few things. I hope you did too. Unfortunately, I was not successful, but that is what gardening and, you know, trying to preserve things and grow your own food and do more for yourself, that's a learning process. And sometimes what you want to happen doesn't work out. And that's okay, because then you learn a different way, or you learn a different method, or you just kind of improvise into a new way of using a product. All right, guys, talk to you soon. Bye.